Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Unlocking Land Access, New Approaches for Expanding Cities. My name is Nana Touré. I'm the director of the OECD Sahel and West Africa Club. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all at the first event of a webinar series that is based on the 2025 edition of Africa's Urbanisation Dynamics report, which was planning for urban expansion. Based on the results of the report, the aim of key factors, which will determine the sustainability of urban growth, which are land governance, housing, and urban finance. We are going to kick off this series with an in-depth discussion about the main impact of rapid urban growth on land and how effective land governance can contribute to sustainable urban growth. Before giving the floor to the experts composing today's panel, I would like to insist on three key observations stemming from our 2025 Africa's Urbanization Dynamic report. The first one is the effective land governance that is pivotal for managing urban expansion. However, in many countries, the formal land governance system is unable to identify, consolidate, plan, service, and deliver land for public, residential, and commercial use at the scale required. As cities grow, pressures on land governance system will intensify. Secondly, sustainable urban planning requires access to land. The ability of local governments to meet their land use planning objectives depends on their capacity to secure access to land. Ensuring transparent land tenure and robust regulatory framework is thus essential for urban planning. Thirdly, the transparency and effectiveness of land governance systems is key to mobilizing greater investment, public and private. While functioning land markets are at a cornerstone in the financial system to leverage investments. In addition, effective land markets enable local governments to implement property and land-based finance, providing a stable and equitable revenue source to fund urban infrastructure and services. Let me now take you through the program of the next 90 minutes. Ms. Sina Schlimmer, Policy Analyst at SWAC, will present the key implications for land governance from the urban expansion projections produced for the 2025 edition of the Africa Urbanization Dynamics report. We'll then have our esteemed panelists from academia, policy research, and government institution to share insights about their respective work in land governance. I'm happy to welcome Madame Bérénice Bon, geographer and researcher at the French National Research Institute for Sustainable Development, IRD, who will present a methodology to analyze land use and conversion on urban fringes. Then we'll welcome Mr. Uchendu Eugene Chigbu, Professor of Land Administration at the Namibia University of Science and Technology, who will explore rural-urban land linkages. And last but not least, I also would like to welcome Mr. Bizualem Admasu, Chief Executive Officer of the Ethiopian Ministry of Infrastructure Development, who will share insights about land-related challenges around cities in Ethiopia. We're truly honored to have you with us today. We'll have these questions, these presentations that will be followed by a 20 minutes Q&A session. And we encourage you to submit questions via the chat. And we'll kindly ask you as well to include your name and institution when doing so. Ms. Margherita will be moderating the session as I will have to leave for other meetings. And I wish you a very rich and stimulating conversation. And thank you for joining us today. Sina, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. Hello, everyone. Warm welcome also from me, and thank you all for joining this first edition of our webinar series. Today, we are looking into how rapid urbanization in Africa is affecting land, and inversely, how effective land governance can contribute to sustainable urbanization. One of the results of our 2025 Africa's Urbanisation Dynamics report is that land governance is key for planning for Africa's urban expansion. Essentially because to plan cities, municipalities and local governments need to be able to access land. In the next 15 minutes, I will take you through some of the key results of the report, which show the implications of rapid spatial and demographic growth on land. And I will then insist on why it is critical to include land governance into urban planning, especially in the peripheries of Africa's cities. Next slide, please. But before I will start the presentation of our key observations, let me quickly make a simple but crucial statement about the connection between land and urbanization. Land is the ground on which any aspect of urban life takes place. In cities, land is needed to build housing, to build roads for mobility, to access basic services, and to undertake economic activities and to do any sort of investment. So for municipalities and local governments, urban land represents also the ground to plan and also a base to collect taxes and generate local revenues. Urban population growth increases the pressure on urban land and risks to exacerbate existing challenges, which are, for example, insecure land tenure and also informal settlements. Yet the results of our report show that urban expansion will particularly impact the surrounding areas of cities where land is less urbanized for now. So understanding land in these areas is critical for planning for urban expansion. Next slide, please. Let's now have a look at some macro trends of urban expansion in Africa. Africa's total population is going to increase by 900 million by the horizon of 2050. Urban areas will absorb 80% of this growth. And in total figures, this means that by 2050, around 1.4 billion people will live in African cities. What we observed is that urban area growth will happen even faster than urban population growth. When the population will double, the urban footprint will actually triple. Next slide, please. The results presented in this report are based on a groundbreaking analysis of the future of urbanization in Africa. The data in the report provides spatial and demographic projections for more than 11,000 urban agglomerations in all African countries. And these projections also stress the implications of the spatial and demographic growth on land. Next slide, please. For example, one consequence of population growth is that the number of agglomerations is going to increase. Between now and 2050, around 2,000 new agglomerations will emerge in Africa. And two interesting observations can be made here. One is that about 50% of these emerging cities are going to emerge in 4 countries of the continent, which are Nigeria, Tanzania, Niger, and Côte d'Ivoire. Secondly, this emergence of new cities is partly due to in situ urbanization. This means that rural areas gradually transform into urban areas, which for land means that rural land is to become urban as well. So these land transformation processes become also evident when we look at the projections of our built-up areas. Next slide, please. Our projections show that urban footprints are expected to more than double. They are likely to increase from 175,000 to 450,000 square kilometers. And in other words, 61% of Africa's cities will be built over the next 3 decades. With regards to land, this involves again to take into consideration the transformation of rural, peri-urban and unbuilt land into built areas. And this also by keeping in mind the second figure of this slide that shows that urban land will only cover 2% of the total continental land area, but at the same time, these 2% will host 65% of the continent's population. Next slide, please. If we now look at how these urban land transformations are different according to different city sizes. So we can see in our spatial projections differences in the expansion of these different cities. So the urban areas of small urban agglomerations, for example, that count between 10,000 and 100,000 inhabitants will grow by 3.1% a year, while cities with 1 or 2 million inhabitants have the fastest area growth between at around 5.2% per year. Next slide, please. We can also observe that between 1970 and 2020, 70% of the growth of Africa's urban surface actually happened by adding new land on the urban periphery. And our current projections indicate similar trends. A 2.6-fold increase is likely to happen in terms of the expansion of the urban footprint by 2050. And more growth will be accommodated through expansion because land in peri-urban areas is more affordable than in central areas. Next slide, please. The importance of land on the urban periphery is also reflected in another important feature of our projection. We have projected the interaction of different built-up areas, and we were able to observe spatial processes, especially fusion. Fusion happens when existing settlements are absorbed during the urban expansion process, leading to the formation of one single urban agglomeration, as you can see in the animation. And as you can also see on the map on the right, fusion is especially prominent in large agglomerations and metropolitan areas. Larger cities, like here in this case, Conakry in Guinea, fusion with surrounding smaller cities. And now the land between these agglomerations, which is projected to be urban as part of this process, is a major asset in these areas. Next slide, please. So what do we take away from these urban projection results in terms of land governance? Most of the urban expansion will happen, 1, around existing urban agglomerations, and 2, in new areas that will emerge through in situ urbanization of existing rural settlements. Therefore, again, land in the urban periphery is key for planning the urban expansion in Africa. One of the key objectives, especially for decision makers and also planners, will be to anticipate the transformation of rural into urban land through effective land governance. And this involves ensuring access to land, to regulating and planning land use change, and determining how these decisions are taken and actually implemented. Next slide, please. But the challenge for effective land governance is that peri-urban land is an administrative gray zone. Land governance in general is characterized by the intervention of multiple stakeholders, such as local and central government stakeholders, municipalities, customary and traditional authorities, but also private land professionals, investors, and brokers. And these situations are now even more complex in peri-urban areas, which are transition zones per se. They are zones of transition and conversion, as we will hear more in Bérénice Bon's presentation in a minute, because rural land is being transformed into urban land. What does it mean? It means that rural land uses, such as agriculture, are progressively replaced by urban land uses, such as residential and commercial land uses. On the legal level, land held under customary tenure is increasingly being formalized, for example, through land titling, and is thereby also transformed into a commodity and entering the market. But oftentimes, these transformations do not at all follow formal processes. Also, land use regulations and applicable land laws depend on the administrative status of an agglomeration. Whether the zone is considered as a hamlet, so rural, or a township, can determine how and by whom this land is governed and allocated. But the administrative status of settlements in peri-urban areas remain often unclear. Next slide, please. Now, given the proximity to the urban center and also the affordability of land, peri-urban areas are also hotspots of land transactions, and land is acquired not only by public and private investors, but also for infrastructure projects, for example, but also by individuals. Peri-urban areas are attractive investment zones for the urban middle class. But most of these transactions, however, happen informally, since most of the land in peri-urban areas is not formally registered and held under customary land tenure. And this leads to vibrant, but mostly informal land markets, which are not tracked through local transaction records and for which no land documents exist. Land markets are also opaque, as there is a lack of information, not only about land ownership, but also about the land value. And not all stakeholders of peri-urban land markets, especially indigenous owners, have equal access to information about land. So informal land markets are a breeding ground for land conflict, which also need to be taken into account when planning for Africa's urban expansion. Next slide, please. So to respond to these land-related challenges on urban fringes, effective land governance systems are crucial to enable planning in areas of urban expansion. This involves transparent processes and clear guidelines for all involved stakeholders, including local and customary authorities. Most of the expected urban growth is going to happen in peri-urban areas, and the window of opportunities to secure land for urban planning in a sustainable way is wider than in already urbanized zones. And lastly, transparent land markets are key to mobilize greater investment, public and private, and therefore equal access to information about land ownership and land values is key. And advanced technology could also help for more efficient land information systems. I will stop my presentation here, and I'm sure that my co-panelists will delve deeper into peri-urban land governance mechanisms. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sina, for this presentation. I hand over to Margherita for the moderation. Thank you, Margherita.
Thank you, Director. I hand the floor to Bérénice Bon. Bérénice, you have the floor. Thank you. Bérénice, can you please unmute yourself?
Voilà, ça va être mieux. Donc, bonjour à tout le monde, je vais parler en français.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll speak in French, and my slides are in English. Again, many thanks for this opportunity. So I'd like to talk about two reports today, which were published in 2023 by the Technical Committee, Land and Development of the Ministry of Europe and of Foreign Affairs, and by the French Development Agency. I won't give you a summary of these reports. These can be found online in French and in English. Today, I wanted to focus on these publications and compare them to OECD and on the measurement of current urbanization, focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. So this report focuses on a massive phenomenon in southern countries, as highlighted by Sina, which is the conversion of rural agricultural land, of natural sites, forests, in land to be built, to be valued as residential projects. For this publication, we focused on 10 case studies in Asia and Africa. As you can see here, you have the case studies in Africa on this very slide, including the work of Sina Schlimmer in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam in particular. So overall, this was in Africa, and we focused on rural surrounding areas of large metropoles, and the land growth of, the growth of these urban centers is quite strong. One of the key ideas of the report is that despite progress in data, measurement of urbanization is underestimated these days. Of course, there are studies which agree on urban sprawling, which is accelerating and which has an impact on very remote areas away from cities. But what is measured in particular is how houses are being developed. And in all of our studies, case studies, we show that many rural areas are turned into areas that can be built, and they remain derelict for a long time. So without any building and without any agreement to build. And this process is irreversible, and quite often it means that there is no more agriculture. So the land plots are meant to be built with fences, as you can see on these pictures, but these pieces of land or plots of land are unbuilt, remain unbuilt for many years without any productive agriculture, without any clear status, and without being integrated in urban planning, urban plans. But all of this means common aspirations of to become urban areas, and this reflects the growing value of land. But if you focus on what is being built, these areas which are meant to be valued are unused. So to better anticipate what's going to happen tomorrow, we need to focus on these plots and which are still unbuilt. And this is something that is quite large in scale. What are the reasons why this is the case? What are the motivations, the aspirations of the different stakeholders? How can we measure this phenomenon? What are we talking about in terms of surface area? So we focused on a methodology that we called plot, biographies, and spatial analysis, focusing on the economic value of trajectory of plotlands over time. You'll find more precise explanations in the report, and I would like to flag here that we decided to focus on to get away from a macroeconomic analysis to focus on the plot itself. As you can see on the left, we analyze the development of land in terms of usage, housing, left fallow, agricultural usage, etc. We also focus on the development of the monetary value of these land parcels and in the change in their sizes. Are they being subdivided from large plots to smaller lots, which are sold sometimes as little as small as 150 square meters. Also, when focusing on these areas, it is very important to focus on the changes in the agricultural sector in line with urban economies. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, we try to rebuild the chains of actors in terms of a transaction from the purchasing of these land parcels to their reselling to other stakeholders. And then we try to identify at what pace these are being sold and how often they change owner. All of this is clearly illustrated here, but this is just an example in Kenya. So all of this can be found in the report. So basically in these studies, we focus on the territorial approach. So we select areas in rural areas which suffer from very high urban pressure. These are studies that we've been carrying out since 2020 in Kenya, in a radius of 30 to 40 kilometers around the capital, Nairobi, in grazing areas. In brown, you have the urban areas. This is the data of Africapolis of the OECD program. And in red, you include these areas, but also large areas which are 10 kilometers away from the city centers. And these areas are not included in the databases on urbanization, as is the case for the human global settlement layer. What I want to show is that most of these land plots have already changed owners and have been broken down in thousands of small plots, which are then being put on the market. So the number one objective of our work, which takes time, as you can imagine, is to try and quantify these surface areas which are concerned by land conversion, the number of plots which are registered based on the breaking down of these areas, the conversion pace, rhythm, and not just focus on what is being built and the plots that are valued in terms of construction or real estate investments, but also why they remain derelict for so long or unused for so long. So we use satellite images, we use local data from the town halls, etc. And on the left-hand side, you have an example of manual treatment processing of Google Earth images. You have this red square showing the rhythm at which land has been subdivided since 2010. And on the two images dating back to 2012 and 2023, you see the type of marking or plotting between 2010 and 2023. On top of this, you have land subdivision that is or data which is being digitized, and this illustrates what happens to these plots. Now, the challenge is that these data are quite fragmented, and the subdivision of plots is not always visible when using satellite images. Sometimes land conversion is just pieces of wood in the ground or traces of paint on the trees, etc. Hence the need to go on site and actually see what is actually happening. Just a few figures. In this kind of study, our measures show that more than 8,627 plots were registered, coming from the original land holding certificates. But since 2010, more than 70% of these plots remained unbuilt. They're not being built. Quite often there are fences, there's no longer any agriculture, these are just left derelict. And so what we want these days is to find a solution to automatically identify these areas based on teledetection and based on AI, artificial intelligence, using these markings on the ground to help public authorities better anticipate tomorrow's urbanization, taking into account these areas, these fallow areas, which are ready to be built. And by the way, we're looking for developers and promoters to actually buy and develop projects on these plots. Second objective of our work is to better understand who the stakeholders involved in these conversions are, their practices, their anticipations, how they work, and how they invest in land. Why is money massively directed towards these outskirts of cities where things will be urbanized in the future? So we carried interviews on site to track down these chains of transactions from the initial owners, so going back to the colonial or pre-colonial period, to the first buyers, to the second buyers of these thousands of small plots coming from these subdivisions of these rural plots. And again, the idea is to monitor these investors in their transactions, as you can see on the picture. So the speculation investors, these terms are quite blurry in academic literature. Based on these studies, investigations, we can develop more detailed economic categories. When accessing that, you need to analyze data coming from land registers as the dates, number of plots, profession of buyers, etc. And you have good examples of the most present economic categories in one of the studies in red on this map, as you can see on this slide. So this is ongoing work. We could actually we realized that these are companies that buy land with businessmen and women who start quite often with a very small investment and who over time accumulate huge land portfolios with banks. So these are cooperatives which are structured based on credit and have access to land. So basically you have all these solutions to pool resources, to have access to land, and then to sell. And concerning the purchasing of these small plots, it's quite often cooperatives, as you can see here in Kenya, and individuals with heterogeneous economic resources. Those who have the most unstable resources move away from the roads where the prices of plots go down, but where there are no services, no access to water, no wastewater treatment, no electrical, no connection to the grid, etc. And since 2010, most of these plots are unbuilt. So the key message is that when working on current urbanization, you need to go beyond the idea based on which these transactions are only linked to residential mobility. Land ownership meets different socio-economic realities. There's the need to build a house, but there's also the fact that people are looking for solutions to store capital. There's a lot of speculation, the idea being to make money. There's also using credit certificates to access credit. There's an anticipation of economic shocks for businessmen. There's social protection to meet your social and education spending for retirement, or to invest and protect yourself from inflation. All of these are reasons why these people invest. So we need to focus on all of these elements, and this means that you need to take into account the role of land as a support for social and savings insurance, and also to understand who are these newcomers. These are rich, wealthy people, even though they might be, but they might also be coming from more popular backgrounds. Now, to conclude, the reports are available online again, but just what are the key messages? Key message number one: the current urbanization measures do not take into account the massive phenomenon of subdivision of rural land into subplots, and these conversions are irreversible and they lead to the end of agriculture. These land conversions go well beyond the areas which are built, which are taken into account to measure urbanization across the world. Now, these research can provide data to public authorities to anticipate what areas will be built in the future and to anticipate the need for services in the future, whilst taking into account the unequal economic resources of the different inhabitants and investors. And quite often these public figures do not include that data. Second message: these conversions and land ownership go beyond the need to find housing that meets socio-economic challenges, and public authorities should focus on these socio-economic conditions of these markets in line with the insurance value of the land and of the changes in the agricultural sector. And message number three: we need to see these territories which are increasingly being urbanized as being little supported by public authorities concerning environmental and health issues. In Kenya, for instance, we are included in research with residents and users of these territories and artists to try and take stock of biodiversity. And we also work on water, the ability, water table, and on pollution because of road dust, as you can see on this picture here in the middle. Last but not least, I just want to say that for public authorities, it would be important to promote a sustainable management of land capital, but also environmental capital in these areas, water resources, ecological function of land, etc., having co-responsibility vis-a-vis the environment and with specific roles and duties for local authorities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Bérénice, for your presentation and for helping us characterize what happens in the land Sina presented earlier. So I'll give now the floor to Professor Uchendu, and I will share your slides.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much. First and foremost, I would like to start by thanking the OECD, Sina, for the invitation to give this talk. And most importantly, I also like to thank the OECD for the publication of Africa's Urbanization Dynamics 2025. For one particular reason, the paucity of data is a big issue in Africa. And this particular document provides and supplies quite a lot of data on urbanization. And so I would encourage the nearly 150 participants in this particular webinar to access that particular document. So thank you. So my talk would be on tackling the urban land dynamics in Africa, but I will look at it from the perspective of the urban-rural land linkages. Next slide. My approach to the discussion would be first and foremost by introducing the Africa's urbanization dynamics. I know that Sina has done a great job in doing that, and Bérénice has actually localized the whole idea, but I will still present maybe one or two examples of what that dynamics entails. And afterwards, I would then speak on the actual issue of tackling the urban-rural dynamics, and finally conclude. Next slide. Well, I think Sina did provide a much more updated version of the urban dynamics in terms of urban expansion in the continent. In fact, she went as far as projecting the future dimensions. But if we have to look back, you see that as at 2019, the outward expansion in terms of the index of urbanization can only lead to some serious conclusions. One of them is that landlessness will continue to increase in Africa. Urbanization will continue to put pressure on land. And most importantly, because of this expansion and based on projections by the UN Habitat and as well as the OECD, about nearly 70% of more land will be needed because of this expansion, especially for food security. And this land would come from rural areas and not the expanding urban areas. So landlessness is expected, and so land governance should be a key issue when we speak about this urban dynamics and how to deal with it. So as part of my discussion with you, I'll be presenting an approach of the urban-rural land linkages, which is based on the premise of leave no one behind and leave no place behind. Because for us to leave no one behind, there's a need to also leave no place behind within the context of urban-rural dynamics. Next slide. Now, this is just an example of the urban dynamics, in a place like Lagos, Nigeria. A huge itinerant population in Lagos sleep in different places at different times because of the very difficult situation in terms of population to land area ratio. And the consequence is that it is difficult to actually keep a booming and mobile urban population static without giving them access to land. So when there is not enough land, then people find themselves moving around. It is also impossible to provide location-specific infrastructure for such a population because unlike in many of the global north cities, where people can actually be pinned to specific addresses, specific locations, in a place like Lagos, people move around so much that it is difficult. I'm talking about majority of the population move around so much that it's difficult to actually pin them to a specific location because if there are no, if they do not have access to land to have houses in a specific place, the consequence is that they move around as they sell. And the implication to planning is that you can't actually plan for this population because you can't actually detect and actually identify where each individual is situated. And so peri-urbanization becomes an issue because as people move around, they also move to the outskirts of the city and they keep occupying land. And as they occupy land, that interpretation is because they need a place to stay. So Lagos in itself reflects an internal dynamics of urbanization. It also reflects this population movement within Lagos, also reflects that population in itself is a continuum, and this movement of the continuum of population leads to a continuum of land occupation. And the consequence is that the missing link in a place like Lagos and most African cities is that there are no continuum of policies, because urban policies are made differently from rural policies. And because of that, a non-continuum of policies becomes difficult to manage, a continuum of population and continuum of land. Next slide. Another example in Africa is Windhoek. Windhoek presents an external dynamics for urbanization. In this case, about more than 40% of Namibians live in urban areas. But at the same time, what you find in Windhoek is majority of this population, more than 60% in these urban areas, live in informal settlements. And the consequence is that in informal settlements, they are squashed with space. For them to survive in the urban areas in Windhoek, most of them have to farm in communal lands in rural areas. And in fact, some spend quite a lot of time farming in rural areas while feeding themselves in urban areas. So this in itself reflects that many who already occupy land in villages claim to be landless in the urban areas. And because of that, they sit on informal settlements in urban areas, waiting for a period when the government can formalize them in order for them to get an actual land plot in the urban areas. So a lack of efficient land registration system in itself means that some informal settlers occupy 2 plots of land for double ownership. And so there is the external dynamics which leads to double ownerships, double occupation, or socially can be interpreted to mean that people live in urban areas but still highly depend on land in rural areas for their food security livelihoods. Next slide. But then there comes the unique issue in Africa. When Sina was presenting, she talked a lot about the need for formalization. When Bérénice spoke, she talked a lot about the need for formalization. But the problem in Africa is that the Prindex report of 2020, as well as the Prindex report of 2024, indicates that in our continent, especially in the sub-Saharan region, that having formal documents does not actually ensure security of tenure on land, which now deviates from the basic principle in land administration that documentation provides provability and as such ensures security. And so now when we talk about documentation in this context, it doesn't always have to be titles, because titles, we know in a place like Nigeria, it could take you 7 years to get a title. And many a times people apply for titles, die before they get it. And many times they also do not get the titles because it will cost you more than about 27% of the value of your property in the process of getting to the title. And in Nigeria, we're talking about CFOs, just certificate of occupancies, signed by a state government. And the process of getting the title itself in Nigeria is about 35 different steps, of which about 7 or 8 of them are signature requiring steps. And signature requiring steps in land registration in places like Nigeria and some African countries is the need to pay money to get those signatures, which makes it difficult for the ordinary person to actually access land. So there's a problem in this instance. Next slide. So having presented the dynamics, I'll quickly simply talk about what we need to do. Next slide. A starting point of what we can do is to view the urban and the rural as a continuum in terms of development implementation, in terms of policy making, and in terms of policy implementation. And the urban-rural land linkage framework in itself has been presented by the UN Habitat, supported by the International Federation of Surveyors, as a concept that can allow for the multiplicity and co-implementation of urban-rural areas. Can you go to the next slide? And the basis for this is that evidence shows that what exists in urban areas exists in rural areas. The differences are usually in terms of priorities, in terms of what is more and what is less. For instance, when you look at the diagram, you see that the urban and rural areas share a lot in common, But between the urban and rural areas are the peri-urban areas, which actually serve as a linkage urban unit or linkage spatial unit to draw that continuum across, and which can apply whether in policy as well as in implementation. Next slide. And this can be seen that when you look at urbanization from the perspective of its spatial, socioeconomic, governance, and environmental perspectives, you see that the peri-urban areas are at the center and allowed to link urban areas to rural areas by virtue of cross-jurisdiction, land policies, physical land use, infrastructure, information, as well as investments. Next. And so the strategy here is that in development, from development perspective, when we look at goals, when we look at objectives, when we look at actions, and as well as impacts of development, it's important to look at the urban units, the rural units, and the peri-urban units as functional units where land management and administration happen. And in this case, when we view policies as a continuum, then goals should be set up in development as a continuum. That what I mean by this is that any goal that is set within the urban should be such that it puts into consideration the rural, and any goals set up within the rural should be such that it puts into consideration the urban. For instance, when urban policies are made for housing and expansion of the urban, it should be put into consideration that the land would come from the rural. And when the rural areas are making policies for infrastructure, they should put into consideration the need to usurp the urban and collaborate with the urban in terms of usage. Next slide. And in planning perspectives, a vision that allows land access and land use in the context of urban-rural interdependence is necessary. And this can be contextualized into institutional issues that can catalyze strategies that require land tools, land sector reforms, and capacity building to enable urban-rural outcomes. And the impact generally would be an interdependent development that allows improved cross-jurisdiction governance, policies, and laws on land in the context of urban and rural areas. Next.
Professor Eugene, could you please conclude? You have 1 minute. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So in applying the urban-rural land linkages in Namibia, we do have an administrative policy that integrates the urban and rural, at least in Windhoek. There's been a creation of a Windhoek rural electoral constituency that allows a certain part of Windhoek that is urban and a certain part of Windhoek within the region that is rural to collaborate in terms of land use, in terms of water use, and other means. And this is just one example of application of urban-rural land linkages. Next. In conclusion, next. So in conclusion, what I'm trying to say here is that land is important for urban and rural areas, and this relates in terms of consumption of land, partnership in terms of spatial interactions, exchanges in terms of transport, mobility, cultures, as well as governance issues related to decision-making and policies. And on that basis, recognizing the in-betweenness of peri-urban areas is crucial in terms of spatial development and spatial planning. And doing this requires that urban-rural areas provide cross-policy or depend on cross-policy opportunities, which can only come from urban development and rural development. And merging this is what the issue is when we talk about urban-rural land linkages. The next slide. So I've concluded, but the next slide is actually QR codes of most of the documents you would see related to urban-rural land linkages. Thank you.
Thank you very much for highlighting the friction that exists in accessing and formalizing this process of land conversion, and also to having presented existing frameworks to understand this rural-urban continuum. I'm sure there will be questions for you later on. I'll hand over to Mr. Bizualem Admasu. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to say again also thank you for OECD for giving me this chance to speak about transforming Ethiopian land access through the urban expansion initiative. So next slide, please. So my content, the presentation is, the first one is I want to just address our land tenure system. And the other one is the urban expansion challenge, the land access challenge, land registration system, urban planning initiative, and in conclusion, I want to raise future land management. So next slide, please. When we come to, again, next. When we come to Ethiopian land tenure system, it's a state-owned framework, state ownership framework. We have the constitutional base for state ownership is Ethiopia Constitution established land as exclusive property of the state and the people, prohibiting private ownership while granting user fact rights to the citizen. So the historical evolution of the ownership processes transition from the previous or imperial and also the feudal system to the state ownership under the Derg regime, and also maintained with the modification in the current federal system. So having this, our administration and management structure is also, we have the hierarchy of management from the federal government to up to the lowest administrative units, which we call it Kabale level, with a defined responsibility for allocation, registration, and also regulation of land use right. Next slide, please. When we come to the use right mechanism, we have the urban land use right and also the rural land use rights. The urban land use right is mainly a lease-based system for urban land, granting temporary rights for development and use with varying duration based on the investment type and also the land purpose. For example, for residential purpose, the duration is 99 years, and for other commercial and industrial, is below that. So some of them are 60, some of them are 40. So it is based on the investment type and also the land use. When we come to the land, the rural land use rights, the lifetime user fact rights granted for farmers, allowing cultivation and limited transfer protected by certification, but prohibited from selling or mortgaging land. But the new Rural Land Administration and Use Proclamation is giving chance for the rural landholders for mortgaging land. And the transferability limitation is restriction on selling land while allowing inheritance, rental, and a limited exchange, creating unique markets dynamics in both urban and rural contexts. So when we come to the urban expansion challenge, rapid urbanization impacts we have in Ethiopia, there is a big demographic shift. Ethiopia's urban population growth exceeds 4% annually, creating pressure on housing, service, and infrastructure in expanding cities and in growing highly or rapidly growing cities. And the other thing is land consumption pattern. Urbanization consumes most of agricultural land at accelerating rate, with Ethiopian cities expand horizontally rather than vertical due to limited planning, or not only limited planning, lack of providing infrastructure for vertical infrastructure, mainly for different activities. And the other thing is housing affordability crisis. Rapid urban growth drives housing price upward, making formal housing unattainable for many and contributing to informal settlement population. This is mainly in the very urban areas where we have a big amount of formal settlements, and where the informal land market is happening, and also informality is mainly happening. So when we come to the land access challenge, the first and the most bigger one is inadequate compensation framework, which is from the compensation and expropriation issues. Inadequate compensation framework, Ethiopia's compensation system, this is mainly starts from our constitution, because there is no ownership rights. So compensation system often undervalues the land and also failing to account for lost livelihood and also future value, causing significant hardship for displaced landholders. And the other one is procedural fairness challenge. Expropriation process lacks transparency and also meaningful participation with limited appeal mechanism and also insufficient notice period for affected community. Even though our new proclamation 1161 clearly stipulates that the landholders must be notified before 1 year, but the practice we have is in most of the places, also in the peri-urban areas and also in urban redevelopment aspects. Also, it's more less than that. And the other one is implementation gap, delay in compensation payment, and also resettlement assistance creates social tension, while inconsistent valuation methods across jurisdictions and compound fairness concern. So even the valuation process is because previously we don't have clear valuation proclamation and also regulations and directives. And also even we don't have that much trained valuers to value different properties of the landholders. However, now we are just trying to prepare the proclamation and also trying to create trained manpower in this area also. Next slide, please. And the other thing is the governance fragmentation, divided ministerial responsibility. Urban land and rural land management falls under different ministries. Urban land is under Ministry of Urban and Infrastructure, which I'm in charge of it, and also rural is under Ministry of Agriculture. So because of this, creating coordination challenge and also policy inconsistency in peri-urban areas, and also conflicting legal framework, because we are using different separate legal framework to manage the urban land and the rural land. There is also conflicting legal frameworks, separate laws governing urban and rural land, causing regulatory gaps and also contradiction when cities expand to agricultural areas. And the other thing is administrative boundary issue. This is also, we have a very critical issue here because we are not using to delineate between urban and rural. We are using fixed boundary. We are not using a general boundary. And also there is, we have two boundaries. One is administrative boundary and the other one is planning boundary. In some cases, planning boundary is bigger than administrative boundary. And in other cases, administrative boundary is bigger than planning boundary. So the space between the two, which is, we call it mainly a peri-urban area, it's always a gray area, which is not covered by the rural law and also by the urban law. So because the smooth transition is not clear and smooth in this area, and also it's not easy for them also to transfer easily to the urban setting, because the thought and the feeling of the rural landholder is that, urbanization is a challenge or a threat for them. So they are not taking urbanization or being urban parties for them. They took it like, as a threat, not as an opportunity. Next slide, please. Land registration system. In land registration system, we have both in rural and urban. We do have land registration and certification system. Certificate-based is for the rural registration. Rural land system utilize certificate for plot level registration, focusing on customary right and also agricultural use pattern. When we come to the urban setting, urban areas employ parcel-based registration linked to cadastral map and formal lease arrangement for high density development, because in urban areas we do have existing system, even though it's paper based and some of them are not very effective, but we do have the existing system. So in urban system, what we are doing is just transferring the old record to the new cadastral system. Because of this, we do have the integration challenge, both system facing integration challenge, including data compatibility, jurisdictional overlap due to the planning and administrative boundary, and also addressing informal settlements in those pre-urban areas. Next slide, please. The data management issue is again another case, the fragmented information system. We do have different information system. We are using different information system, multiple disconnected database for urban and rural land record, creating integration challenge and comprehensive land management approach, and also gap in coverage, incomplete land information, particularly in pre-urban areas. In urban areas, at this time, our coverage is very low, which is around 27%, and most of them are in the inner part of the city, it's not on the peri-urban area, and also the same from the rural side. Also, they are mainly working on the internal part of rural areas. So there is still a gap of that coverage, and also the other one is data inconsistency issue or conflicting information between certificate-based rural system and also parcel-based registration system we have. Next, please. Urban Planning Initiative, next, urban expansion program. So we are trying to implement the urban expansion program with the help of New York University, Cities Alliance, and different supporters. So while we are implementing this, we are taking this as a government planning initiative, strategic program designed to pre-plan urban growth area before development occurs and ensuring coordinated expansion and sustainable city growth. So even though there is always informality happening on the pre-urban area, at least we are just doing a kind of, guided planning or a kind of, planned informality. We are doing like that. So we are also guiding the infrastructure coordination in this sector. At least we are, availing arterial roads or giving space for roads and also for preserved areas, not to be part of the informal settlements, and which helps us in the future, to invest a lot on correcting or regularizing those informal settlements when they are included in the urban areas. And also this also helps us in reducing informal settlements and also not to demolish lots of informal settlements while the urban area is already reached in those pre-urban areas. Next slide, please. So from all the lesson and all the challenges, this is our future land management. This is the future land management. The first one is we have to start from the legal framework harmonization, aligning statutory legal frameworks. So harmonizing national land law with the local regulation to eliminate contradiction between rural certificate-based and urban parcel-based registration system. And also an institutional coordination mechanism, establishing formal structure for collaboration between land management agencies to integrate data system and reduce administrative overlap. And the other one is unified land information system. Even though it's not expected to have one nation, one system, at least we have to have developing comprehensive digital platform that connect rural and urban records, enabling seamless information exchange between different governance levels. And the other thing is the information system unification, unified land data system, integration of rural certificate-based and urban parcel-based registration system to eliminate data gap and also overlap in data management, cross-institutional coordination, harmonization between land authorities, urban planning agencies, and also local governance to streamline process and reduce bureaucratic barriers, because we will not bring all those actors or part of that urban expansion or part of the urbanization, the land authorities and also the urban planning and institutions we have also from private and also from academias also, and also the local governments who are the actual implementer of all the policies, legal frameworks and everything we have. And the other thing is the technology integration framework. This is also very important, implementation of compatible digital platform connecting cadastral system, local development plan, community-based land information for comprehensive urban management. And the other thing is the most important part is the local capacity development. As I've mentioned earlier, the land is there at the local level. So they are who is doing everything on the ground. So we need to capacitate them. So this is also the most important part from our side, because training local officials is also very important. Equipping municipal staff with technical skill and also knowledge to implement land management policies effectively and respond to community needs. Other one is, community skill development. This is also very important because land is everything for our community. So if we equip them with skill development, they will be part of the development, and also maybe also help us, to reducing at least informality, especially on the pre-urban areas. So building capacity among residents to participate in the planning process, understanding land rights, and engaging in local development initiative is also the other thing. And the final point is institutional strength. Enhancing organizational framework and governance structure to support sustainable urban growth and efficient land management system is our main component in future urban land management and land management in Ethiopia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Admasu, for the presentation, for presenting the Ethiopian case, but also to highlight and link back to the gray area. It was fascinating to see that in this case, we have a special definition for it between the administrative and the planning area that you mentioned, and also the data challenges that arise from it. So this is the end of the presentations. We are now opening the floor for questions. Please do note that the presentations will be made available after the webinar, as well as the links to the resources that were presented. So the reports, of course, and past the launch event for this report as well. So we already have some questions, but we have still some time, so you can keep adding them in the chat. The first one is from Ms. Kago, who's asking about the impact that urban expansion has on rural landowners. And I will raise this for both Sina Schlimmer and Bérénice Bon. Sina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Margherita, and also thanks a lot for all your presentations, dear co-panelists. So I think the impacts of urbanization on rural or peri-urban landowners are different. This depends heavily also on the local context. But what we can observe that in general there can be an asymmetry of knowledge again about land values and market dynamics between individual land sellers and buyers, private or public. And this asymmetry is very important. So I think for a more effective land governance, a clear access to an equal access to land information is very important. What is also important to consider is that for rural landowners, land is oftentimes the main asset for their socioeconomic activities. And at the same time, and as part of urbanization, it represents an interesting opportunity to access fast cash, for example, in cases where no social security networks exist, for example, for health expenditures. So by selling land in peri-urban areas where the land markets are vibrant, there is also a risk, obviously, of access to a main economic asset for landowners. And I mean, in very local cases, like the one that comes into my mind is Kenya, in the south of Kenya, in the Kajiado County, Bérénice also works on. The effect of urbanization is also an individualization of land ownership in areas where previously, and I mean, oftentimes according to customary rules, there has been collective land titles. So we can also see a tendency towards individualization of land ownership. I will give the floor to Bérénice to complete this answer.
Non, j'ai pas grand-chose à compléter.
Well, I don't have very much to add. What you said, Sina, is absolutely right. The question also says, is there a process of gentrification in these peri-urban areas? And here, as a researcher, what we're trying to do is to measure the data, and the situation is very different from one place to another. For example, even if you talk about rural landowners, there are many, many different categories. So you need to look at who's a big landowner, who has inherited land, what are the conditions of farmers, what's the access to water and other resources, the whole issue of climate change. And so the gentrification is very complex. The different people who buy land also are very different. You have big private companies buying land, and you have also people with very little money who are going to go in areas that are very isolated, far from the roads, with no public services, but just that they can buy a little plot of land. And so this is why it's important to have research that really has a very granular understanding of the different owners of land and also a more granular understanding of the buyers.
Merci beaucoup, Bérénice.
Thank you very much, Bérénice. What you presented in your presentation also shows that it's very important to go beyond the models. It's very important to do work on the field, and you do work on the field, and that research is extremely precious and important. We have another question from Mr. Rashid that was asking about the role of land information.
Sorry, I'm continuing in English. The same questions can be framed this way. What is the role of land information systems in improving land governance? I think all presenters spoke to that a little bit. So maybe I'll first invite Mr. Admasu and then Professor Chigbu to intervene, but then of course anyone can intervene. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, land information system is very important, to support have a very good land governance, because we need to know first our resource, where is the plot, and then we have to capture it in a proper way. So when we have a kind of up-to-date information, it's very helpful to have very good and informed decision on land, especially, and it helps us especially in developing.
Noël, salut Noël.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. This was. You can continue.
Okay. So especially in developing countries like Ethiopia, having a land information system or having up-to-date information system on land helps us to make informed decision, especially on pre-urban areas where there is a gray area for us. But if we know all our pre-urban areas land in our database, and if we have up-to-date information on that, it helps us to manage in a proper way. So that's why land information system is very crucial in the aspect of land governance, because one of the tool we are using to administer our land is land information system.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Chigbu.
Yeah, so I think the previous speaker already said it all, but my summary to it is that land information system is necessary to know who owns what, where the land is, for what the land is used for, and for what it could be used for. This information and also the changes happening on the land, information is needed on this. This is very important because decisions on development cannot be made without an understanding of where the land is, what is being used for, who owns it, and for what it could be used for. Thank you.
Thank you. we have another set of questions that go on to the peri-urban areas. So if Sina Schlimmer could elaborate a little bit more on what this exactly means and who are the stakeholders and institutions that are involved in governing this land. And maybe Bérénice Bon can also speak a bit on the model of land conversions that she presented in the slides. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think the thing is that, as I said in my presentation, that land governance per se is a multi-stakeholder affair. And this is because since it is a transition zone also from rural to urban governing institutions, there is also transition in terms of stakeholders who are actually taking decisions about what is going to happen with the land, and peri-urban land becoming more and more urbanized and being a zone for an interest zone, for example, to establish special economic zones, bigger infrastructure. There's also interest by the central government to intervene. So we have per se a situation where multiple layers of administrative stakeholders already intervene. And added to that, as I mentioned in my presentation, we have both public and statutory stakeholders and also customary authorities. I mean, this depends heavily on the administrative setup of the country. For example, in Ghana, chiefs and traditional authorities are more involved in land governance as in other countries. But we have these setups, so multiple administrative layers and multiple stakeholders from both customary and public authorities. And lastly, we have to add the land markets, which involve land professionals, private surveyors, planners, land brokers that are also mostly part of the informal market, and obviously the buyers and the sellers. So this makes it a very complex zone to govern. Thank you.
La question était sur les modèles de conversion, c'est ça?
Yes, I think the question was on the conversion models. So I don't know if there are models really.
Du côté scientifique,
but
c'est la production
we academics, we try to produce data or collect data that can help decision makers. And what we really try to do is to look at the long term and look at all the changes in land use. And what I tried to show in my presentation is that we talk a lot about speculation in peri-urban areas, but behind these land use changes, there are very diverse economic interests. For example, some people buy land because it's a form of social insurance. If you then need to spend for your healthcare, you have land, it's an asset. There are also more general issues. This affects all countries, financial inclusion, social insurance. For example, if you have a hospital bill, you need sometimes to mortgage your land to be able to pay your hospital bill. We've seen this in Nairobi, for instance. So these are very different economic functions. And as academics studying these land use changes, we have to work with many different stakeholders. We need to collect a lot of data. And we really need more specific and more granular data to look at the different economic and political capacity of these different multi-stakeholders. What are their expectations, their aspirations also? What do they expect from land? Why they want to invest? So that then the public authorities, when the planning, think about the social and economic conditions, and also a number of very neglected issues like the environment, like public health, that often aren't taken into account when we deal with these issues.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
En lien avec ça, mais on a une question directement pour.
We also have a question
for Mr. Bizualem Admasu.
For Mr. Bizualem Admasu.
If you can reflect on the role that local communities should play in future urban expansion projects. And this is an anonymous attendee.
Can you please repeat the question? Sorry.
Yes. If you could reflect on the role that local communities should and can play in future urban expansion projects.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the participation of the local community is very important in the future urban expansion, because they are the one who are dividing the parcel and selling or going to the informal markets, because they don't know what is the purpose and what is the future plan of that area, because they are not part of the planning stage. So if we start to participate them from early stage, which is from the planning stage, they know what is planned for the future. So they will be part of, all the expansion process. But the problem happening, especially nowadays, is that they are not part of the planning process. So they only get the final decision. Their land is already allocated, for example, for roads or for any other, infrastructure or any social or commercial infrastructure. So because of this, participating them in the early stage, especially starting from the planning stage, is very crucial for the future smooth urban expansion. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other presenter want to follow up on that? Okay, that was comprehensive. Thank you. We have an enormous amount of questions, but we will give the floor to Philip Hendricks, the head of unit. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Margherita, and thank you to all the presenters for really interesting and stimulating presentations. I saw in the chat there were questions for Mr. Bizualem Admasu, whether the Ethiopian approach on the data systems have been shared with other countries in Africa. I think this, I would like to hear the answer on this question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, yeah, it's possible, and it's because we are working in both rural and urban areas. So we have a very good experience actually in land registration and in the information system we have in the rural area, especially because more than 30 million land is already certified and registered, and we have it in our database. And also from the urban side, we have more than 1 million parcels of land is already in our database. So yeah, that's possible.
But can I ask you a follow-up question? Are you exchanging with other countries in Africa on your system? Are other countries interested to learn from your experience?
Yeah. We have a lot of experience sharing, and also there are a lot of African countries, especially from Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda. They visited also. We also share experience with them. We've been to Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, learning experience from each other, especially in urban areas. We've been to Kenyan Geospatial Institutes, and also the team from Uganda also visited our rural land administration system we have. So there is a very good experience sharing, especially in Eastern Africa mainly.
Thank you. I'm seeing that there is a question for Professor Chigbu. You were typing live. Do you want to answer that to the room? I'll read out the. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, ask the question. I'd like to answer to the room.
evidence shows that the documentations alone doesn't suffice to ensure land tenure security. Could you explain why and what can be done to improve the situation?
Yeah, I think the link between the use of documents as a means of provability in land tenure and land governance are the owners, those who exercise rights on land, and those who hold the documents on one side, and those who interact with the landowners. So in my assessment, I think it's more about human behavior. So when the rules are there, and land tenure itself is it's a rule. When we do policies and policies on the use of land, what we basically do is rearrange the rules of tenure. And so when the rules are not followed, then the consequence is that documents, formalization and regularization processes or outcomes are not respected. And those who do not respect them, when neighbors do not respect the documents held by others or the use of land, then the consequence is tenure insecurity. And I think the difference between this situation and other situations is that where tenure is more secure, documents and ownership of land are respected. But where it is not, it is where the legal system is somehow either broken or does not have the capacity to subject people to legal penalties. And that, to me, is the issue. So I think there's a need for behavioral reform in dealing with this situation, and more has to do with the legal issues around the implementation of land tenure. Thank you.
Thank you. We will answer one last question from Corey Sutter. Was asking about the land value tax. So it was mentioned again across the presentations, but you can find more thorough analysis on the potential of these instruments in the report in chapter 4, authored by the African Development Bank. And as reminded earlier, we will share also the link to the report after the webinar. And I will pass on to Sina Schlimmer for concluding remarks. Thank you again for all the questions.
And thank you, Margherita, for this fantastic moderation of the Q&A session. Thank you. Thanks a lot also to all of our speakers, Bérénice, Bizualem, and Eugene. Thank you for sharing your insights from your research and also different professional sectors. And also thank you to the whole SWAC team for setting this webinar up and for everyone who has worked for this behind the scenes. I think we said a lot about land in urban and peri-urban areas already, but I just want to insist again on a couple of key points that peri-urban land, and that I think we all agree on after this session, is key for planning for Africa's urban expansion, and therefore we also need to better understand the rural and urban linkages, and that urban and rural areas shouldn't obviously seen as two distinct geographical areas, but also areas of expertise. So expertise from both sectors is crucial. What is also important to plan is the data. So the need for data has been stressed during the different presentations, data on land use, on land ownership, and also on existing land rights. And therefore also we need, although it is a general issue, a general challenge, also very localized responses. Land governance involves, again, a multitude of stakeholders on different levels and from different professional sectors. This has also been stressed during the presentations, but it is also questions of involving different policy sectors. So land is not a standalone topic. Housing, agriculture, infrastructure, all these different sectors of expertise have to come together when we're talking about peri-urban and urban land governance in general. And I think this is also the reason why we kicked off the series with a discussion on land. It is related to other key topics of urban expansion, including urban finance and housing. And these are the topics that we're going to deal with in the 2 next webinars, which are part of the series. So the next one is going to happen in June. so please stay tuned and read our newsletter. You will receive the invitations very soon. And yeah, we are 1 minute overdue, so have a nice weekend, and thank you again to all of you for participating and joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.